Hi, friends. Welcome to the Inner Revival podcast. This is Monika Kirkland, and I am so glad that you are here. Today, I have such an incredible conversation for you with my dear friend, Mary Marantz. She is the author of her third book that is releasing soon called Underestimated, the surprisingly simple shift to quit playing small, name the fear, and move forward anyway. This conversation was such a blessing to me personally, and I know it is going to resonate with you guys. And to the person out there who has just struggled with fear or with the inner critic or just struggling with what steps to take to be able to actually move forward and get out of feeling stuck, to get out of survival mode. So I know this conversation will bless you. And so without further ado, please enjoy this conversation with Mary Marantz and make sure to pick up a copy of her new book, Underestimated, which will all be linked in the show notes. Welcome to the Inner Revival podcast, because revival starts with you. As we allow God to heal, restore, transform us, and renew us from the inside out. We say, Lord, have your way in us. Let your kingdom come. Let your will be done in us on earth as it is in heaven. Hi, Mary. Thank you so much for coming back on the podcast. I'm so excited to talk to you all about your new book.
Oh my gosh, Monika, I feel like there's just like these like spots of like warmth and sunshine and safety in my calendar right now. And you are like one of the brightest ones. I've been counting down the minutes to get to hang out with you again. So thanks for having me back on the show.
Yay. Well, some of my listeners may remember the last conversation we did. It was one of my most downloaded episodes, and it was so encouraging. So I know you are just going to have so much just hope and encouragement, and I can't wait to hear more about this new book. So I would love to just give you space to just tell us a little bit. You've written, now this is your third book. I would love to hear just a little bit of backstory on just your writing process and what led you to writing Underestimated.
Yeah, 3 books in 5 years, which is wild. Wild because I knew I wanted to write books since I was 5, and Dirt didn't come out until I was 40. So if you're doing the math, I'm about to be 45 in May. And it's so interesting to have this dream that went for so long in a like desert season with like no progress really to be seen, and sort of like this, like at certain points I was planting, but not really very faithfully. It was more just like this thing that felt so big, so colossal, as I talk about in Underestimated, the colossus of cloud, that it just felt like you don't even know where to start. And it just felt like so, you couldn't even get your hands around it. And then to be on this side of it, to have seen so much fruit in just a few years, that's been really wild. And they say that you write the book that you need. And I've written the books, plural, that I need, because my first book, Dirt, very much told the story of growing up in a single wide trailer in rural West Virginia, caved in ceiling, which then led to a caved in floor. The whole place smelled like mildew, which would cling to your clothes and your very dignity. We had mushrooms growing out of the carpet at some points. My dad's logging boots put dirt and mud there, and we had stray animals that would go inside just as much as they go outside. So I say, like, you don't know where the brown shag carpeting ended and the dirt began. And so I started there, and then I end up at Yale for law school, and that becomes Dirt. And a lot of people are probably thinking, oh, I've seen this movie. I've read this book before, because we're very familiar with that kind of underdog trope, this humble beginnings, to, making it big somehow, making it to the Ivy League or some sort of sports success. We just saw Rory McIlroy win the Masters, and like the story we fell in love with is this little boy in Northern Ireland whose parents had nothing and, worked multiple jobs because they saw their son, their only child, had a gift and a dream. And so when I was writing Dirt, it was really important to me to say, what does this book look like? Like this storyline we're familiar with look like, not through the lens of look what I did, but look who came before, and how do we go back and make peace with our past and have empathy for those who came before, and not go through life feeling like our story disqualifies us or like it's a chip we have to wear on our shoulder or a thing we have to keep hidden. And then that brings us to Slow Growth, which I'm not going to give you a full synopsis of all the books. Don't worry. Slow Growth essentially boils down to, how do I stop achieving for my worth? How do I stop feeling like I am only as good as my latest good thing that I've done? And then that brings us to Underestimated, which is like, once we make peace with our past and once we stop achieving for our worth, how do we now start get moving on the good work that was prepared for us in advance, and stop playing small on what we know we're being called to do, to be obedient in that. So that's kind of the journey that sort of brought us to this moment right here. And I feel like I've been living out the message of Underestimated for about 45 years.
Yeah, that's so good. And you just have so much wisdom. And I feel like everything you've walked through. That's why your words always resonate so much, because you're speaking with someone who has learned, maybe you even had to learn the hard way. But then you get to encourage us and just teach us everything you've learned along the way. And I just love how much you share your heart so vulnerably with us. And I love in Underestimated, you talk about these like simple mindset shifts that can help just move us from that stuck feeling to actually starting, to stepping out, to stepping into our purpose. And so I'm just curious, for the woman who is feeling stuck in that place of just survival mode, what are some of those small but powerful shifts that can help all of us to just be able to move forward?
Yeah. So for everybody listening, the rest of the title, it's Underestimated. The subtitle is The Surprisingly Simple Shift to Quit Playing Small, Name the Fear, and Move Forward Anyway. And so the whole book is really centered around this idea that fear is a really boring liar, which I know we're going to talk more about. And so each chapter is a different face that fear tries to put on to when we think we have it under control in one way, it sort of slips in the side door wearing a different face. And so each chapter we have perfectionism, people pleasing, procrastination, imposter syndrome, overthinking, even a fear of success, 14 of them in total. And chapter 3 is self-sabotage is a shot glass. And this is where we really start to see the work of these, what this shift is going to be, start to take root. And so, chapters 1 and 2 are sort of just laying out the problem. Chapter 1 is about, why do we feel like we keep starting over? Why do we feel like we keep pushing this boulder all the way up to the mountain, almost get to our breakthrough moment? And at the last second, we blink and we lose our grip and we lose our way, and the boulder rolls all the way back down the mountain. Meanwhile, everybody else is just implementing, executing, achieving. What? Like it's hard? Elle Wood style. And then chapter 2 just tells us some characteristics of fear. But in chapter 3, we really get into this concept of like, why do we keep doing this to ourselves? Why do we keep allowing fear to do it to us? The cover of the book says, because the person counting you out the most just might be you. And so to kind of really set this picture, I first have to admit to you and all of your listeners, Monica, that I have a guilty pleasure, which is, some people have the Kardashians or the Bachelor. Mine is to follow really super cheesy success accounts on Instagram, like the kinds with like lions and Lamborghinis, roar until you get everything you came for, a private jet with an Albert Einstein quote, whatever. I love to sort of hate follow them where I'm just making fun of them in my head. But one day in particular, there was just this post that was kind of a quick scroll by that was very much like not that. It was very much not the regular kind of content they post. And it was a picture of a shot glass. And it said, if you think that you have the capacity of a shot glass, then you will subconsciously shrink yourself down. Every time you get a little bit more, you'll shrink yourself back down. And I added, in the tiny containers you believe that you belong in. It said our goal should be to expand our capacity, expand it until it's the size of an infinity pool, which is like, of course, it was an infinity pool on an account like that. But it is the clearest definition or explanation of self-sabotage I had ever seen. And so very shortly after that, I had Dr. Allison Cook on my podcast, and I was asking her about it. And I was like, how do we stop doing this if we don't even realize we're doing it most of the time, if it's happening most of the time subconsciously? And, you mentioned that sort of idea of like the woman stuck in survival mode. And for some of us, the way that we grew up, if there was some chaos or some instability growing up, that switch of survival mode got flipped. And we have not been able to figure out how to flip it back off, to turn it back off. And, we feel like we kind of keep returning to chaos because it is familiar. I joke in the book, like a bad geometry proof gone awry. Chaos feels familiar feels comfortable. We've mistaken comfortable for safe. So therefore, by the law of transitive property, chaos must equal safe. And so we kind of continue to return to that. And in her book, The Best of You, she talks about we are actually able, if we didn't have that growing up, we can actually teach that to ourselves as adults. And we do that by setting these small but important commitments to ourselves. So they have to be manageable, but they also have to matter to us. And then we actually keep them. Set small but important commitments and actually keep them. And she looked me right in the eye through the screen and she said, Mary, as you do that, you are teaching yourself that there is a grown-up in the room who can be trusted. That grown-up is you. And so, I know like for Christians in particular, we can get really uncomfortable with phrases like self-trust or trusting yourself or self-help. And so for me, like I've really been thinking about this as like the difference between little T and big T. So this is not like where my ultimate trust or my ultimate hope are. But by self-trust and expanding a capacity for self-trust, what I mean really is just good stewardship.
Yeah.
So many of us won't raise our hands because we think it's being prideful. We think we're going to make it all about us, or we think we'll mismanage it, right? This is that third person hiding away, that burying their talent because they're afraid they'll mismanage it and end up losing the one that they have. And then, ironically, it gets taken away from them anyway.
Yeah.
Because they forfeit the opportunity. So it's just this really interesting idea of like that chapter sort of frames the rest of the work we do in the book of with each different face of fear, we're making a very small but important shift forward where we are no longer trying to go big our way out of playing small, right? There's a breakout section called The Shift in the book after chapter 3 that says the best ideas are a switch, not a dial. We're not turning the volume up on what we already think. We're flipping the way we think on its head. And the common wisdom says in order to quit playing small, you must always go big. Leap and the net will appear. But paradoxically, some of the most important work we will do to expand our capacity and quit playing small is actually by starting small. Small but important, and actually keeping it. So that was a really big, long answer, I know, but it really kind of sets the whole framework of the book of like we are becoming the grown-up in the room who can be trusted to steward these gifts and these opportunities well.
Amen. And that's what I think we all want. And I think, we get stuck. And I love the idea of like mindset work, because I know for me, often I have been caught in self-sabotage or feelings of rejection or fear of failure or even fear of success at times. It just, ebbs and flows. And those things can definitely keep us stuck. But I think when we process that and we dig into our stories and we do some of that harder work, that's where the healing comes from. There was one thing you said in your introduction that it really resonated. You wrote that for you and me, our hope does not rest in pushing and pushing until we get everything we ever wanted. It's going back to the beginning, busting the lid off of things and healing everything that made us think we had to push so hard in the first place. And that's kind of what we're all about here on the Inner Revival podcast. It's like healing from the inside out. And so I would love to hear, specifically what that has looked like maybe in your own story or what you've seen that look like in some other people's stories as well. Yeah.
You know what I'm thinking? Like, I'm actually let me grab the book right here. And I think I might actually just read a very small excerpt from it because it is one of my, I feel like I keep saying this. They're like all my little children. I don't know which one is my favorite. But let me read this one passage because it really sets up that question well, and I just need to keep talking while I find it. Okay, there we go. Here we go. So it's basically talking about like this sort of attitude of like, underestimate me, that'll be fun. And it says, at first glance, it is fun, isn't it? This dedicating our entire lives to proving other people wrong. Spoiler alert, the hero gets everything they ever wanted. Oh, you thought you should bet against me? You thought I couldn't do it? Big mistake. Huge. Cue the Rodeo Drive shopping spree montage. So why then does it feel like we are the ones always left holding the boulder when it all comes crashing down? That's because in our most honest moments, when it's just us and the darkness settled in, we know we have made an external enemy of anyone who would ever doubt us, because it's easier than having to deal with what's on the inside. If you think we're mad at other people for underestimating us, you should see how much we hate ourselves. What's on the inside? At this, I picture a Pandora's box. Inside is a glass menagerie of all our most fragile doubts, our most shattered self-sabotaging, the sharpest shards of all our second-guessing, perfectionism, overthinking, over-apologizing, and generally taking ourselves out of the race before it has even begun. They are all stuffed down and hidden, temporarily kept captive even, in this gold music box we keep proudly displayed on the mantle and take down at least once a day to spit polish until it shines. We've been told that it's one of those music boxes with a tiny ballerina inside, her feet grotesquely fused directly into the metal spring meant to keep her forever spinning out. It's in there now to remind us how we must always be on our toes and how if we ever let anything drop, including the act, we will just cease to exist altogether. And so from there, it goes on to talk about how in the actual myth of the Pandora's box, a lot of people don't realize this, but we know it as the lid that was lifted and let a swarm of evils loose on the world. At the very last minute, the lid was slammed shut and it left only one thing remaining inside, and it was hope. And philosophers have argued for years. I'm a philosophy, I have my undergrad and my master's in moral philosophy, have argued for years about whether that hope was actually intended as a blessing, right? A silver lining in a world with so much trouble. Or whether that kind of hope, the hope that says you will always get everything you ever wanted if you will only keep pushing, was actually intended as a curse itself, this sort of illusion of comfort. Yeah. And so that's where, going back and busting the lid off of things, like that's the context for that. It's this idea of this Pandora's box where we feel like if we just keep shoving down all of this shattered, self-sabotaging, the insecurities, all those things I said, then we can keep it under control that way. We can tighten up the lid on it. We can shove it down and keep it under control that way. But it always comes bursting out, just at that last breakthrough moment. Yeah. And so for me, and I in that section included an excerpt from Dirt where I talk about a dream I had once, an actual literal dream, not a metaphoric, artistic license dream, where the trailer I grew up in was sinking. And I was like trying to take all this junk with me, like ratty stuffed animals and musty sweaters. And this voice in my dream said, there's still time for you. We can still get you out. You can still come, where we're going, but you have to be willing to lay that heavy junk down. And so the boulder becomes kind of all this junk we've been carrying from our story that stands for things that it didn't really stand for. Yeah. This scarcity, mindset, this disqualifying lack. And so, yes, that's where we begin in chapter 1 is if we're going to climb this mountain, if we're going to go where we're headed, nobody's telling us we have to take the boulder with us. We're the only ones telling us we have to have the boulder. Yes. So that's the context there.
Wow. One of the illustrations you used in the introduction that I really resonated with personally is, the idea of the mountain and pushing the boulder up the mountain, and that some people sit at the bottom and they are too intimidated to even start. But then there's those who do start, but then they end up back down. And then it's like, I feel like that's the place I got stuck, is that defeat motivation cycle where I get really motivated and then it gets really hard, or I hit roadblocks, or I have unmet expectations and disappointment of the outcome. And then I roll back down and then I sit at the bottom, like, should I even try again? Yeah. So for me, like just vulnerably sharing, like that resonated with me because that's kind of in that place that I've been where I just, like that thing about Pandora's box and the hope. It's like, you think, well, if I do X, Y, and Z, then I will get this result. But then when that result doesn't come, you can get defeated. And so getting, for me, vacillating between really hopeful and encouraged and motivated and then being super defeated and discouraged. It's like, it's so exhausting. Yeah. I would love if you could share a little more about that.
Yeah. I wrote a post not too long ago on Instagram that said one of the most brutal parts of being an adult we don't talk enough about is that over time, we develop a muscle memory for disappointment. We've been here before. We've tried that before. We got our hopes up and it didn't work out. And I said, if we're not careful, that knee-jerk reaction of letdown can turn into a chronic case of give up. And I was speaking to myself there because it's really easy to slip into, especially those of us who have pretty strong pattern recognition from, maybe our stories growing up. If there's sort of, a sort of volatile home life, it can really turn into like a really acute sense of pattern recognition. And so what we can start to do is go, this is just the way it is. This is the way it was. Yeah. This is the way it always will be. That is something my dad would infamously say to me about his own life. For me, anything was possible. I could be anything that I wanted. I was going to college. We were doing the thing. But for him, this is the way kid, let me tell you, this is the way it is. This is the way it was. This is the way it always will be. And for kids, more is caught than taught. And so I absorbed that into my brain as well. And I'm telling you, Monika, I battle that daily. I battle that daily. And what I say in the book is, let me tell you something, preaching to myself. Yeah. It always doesn't work out until it does.
Right.
If any great success story, if you stopped in chapter 3, it would sound like a great failure. Yeah. But like no setback, no story. Nobody wants to read the book or watch the movie of coming, before we hopped on, we were doing In a World, coming this summer. The movie of here is a girl who applied for her dream job and immediately got it. Right. We don't show up for those stories, but when we're living them, we think it's disqualifying. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's so, so good. You also, one of the things you talk about is this tension of kind of feeling like you're knowing that this inner knowing or confidence, like I am called to something more. Or, wow, I really do know that God has a specific purpose for my life. But then also wrestling with the doubt and the discouragement of like, God, can you actually use someone like me? Like, how could I ever get there? Your reality is so far from what you feel called to. And so I know that's something that just resonates with a lot of women. So for the woman listening who maybe feels that, who feels called, but just lacking in confidence, how would you encourage her? What are maybe some mindset shifts she could actively start practicing?
Yeah. So I've been saying as I've been kind of going around that like this this book is for the woman or the person who feels like they're being called up to greatness. They feel like they're being called up to more. They feel like there's just even from a young age, they felt like there was some calling on their lives. And they also simultaneously doubt that someone like you will ever get there. I say in the book, how can we be so driven and so doubtful at the very same time?
Yeah.
And there's this really interesting book that I quote called The Triple Package that was actually written by 2 Yale law professors who were teaching at Yale Law when I was there. I took one of them for constitutional law, and it's Jed Rubenfeld and Amy Chua. They wrote a book called The Triple Package, and it's 3 unlikely traits that basically determine the most successful groups in America. And the 3 unlikely traits, the first 2 they seem to be in tension. So one of them is that they call it like a feeling of superiority. And I don't like that because it sort of sounds like, superior over other people. Well, when they are actually describing it, it's more like what we're talking about here. They just feel called to greatness. Yeah. The second paradoxic trait, though, is that they simultaneously feel super insecure. They have kind of this chip on their shoulder, this like, I got to show everybody how far I've come. That when those 2 forces bump up against each other, I wish I had like a, physics term here. We'll just say like the centrifugal force of the inertia of contrasting, reactionary forces. It's not a real thing. It actually produces drive. And the third trait is just this willingness to kind of delay instant gratification for future results. And honestly, those 3 traits describe me to a T. And I've said that to a lot of people on my own show, on podcasts, and usually people are just like, I don't really get that, but I don't resonate with that, Mary. But like for those of us who do, for those of us who didn't grow up with a lot and we can't explain it, but we've just always felt like we were headed somewhere, that our story was going to make sense. It was all going to be worth it. Those 2 competing factors, and then, we maybe hone the third one. But just feeling like we're being called to more, and we also doubt we would ever get there. There's a Groucho Marx quote that says, I would never want to join a club that would ever have me as a member. And so we can really spend a lot of our lives chasing after the next big thing only to get it. And then because it's now happened to us, it must not be that big of a deal. And then we're chasing the next, we're constantly moving the chains, And so for the person who feels like I'm never going to get there, who I am disqualifies me. A lot of that really kind of gets into, chapter 4 is second guessing is a missing handbook. And we feel like we were never given this missing handbook for life where other people were, and other people have the information, they have the knowledge, they have the connections. So we feel like there will always be somebody who will show up better than us, which gets into chapter 5, not enough is a blank space. And so we battle all of that back. And maybe we can talk more about this in a minute about sort of like the science of all of this, of retraining our brains. But we battle all of that back through what I call evidence to the contrary. So every time we feel like there's something about us that will always show up wrong, we list off 5 ways lately that we actually got it right, that we prepared in advance, that we were faithful with that thing we were trusted with, that we actually stewarded it well. And we point to the evidence of who we're becoming, not the evidence of how it's always been.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. What you said really resonated with me because I grew up with not a lot. I grew up in a very broken family. We were like very like Jerry Springer family. And, but I did have this feeling, and it's funny because looking back at it, I'm like, maybe it was just pride, but I did have this sense of like, I don't know how, but it's going to be different for me. Like I see the way the people around me living, and I want a different way, but I didn't even know a different way existed. Like I had no exposure to the church. I had really not a lot of exposure to kind of healthier families or people who are more, achieving their dreams or just working for something bigger than themselves. I really had never encountered that, but I just kind of had this innate sense of, a feeling like, I don't know what it is, but I do feel like I am put on this earth for a purpose. And then even now I feel like I still get to uncover bits and pieces of that as I walk closely with the Lord of like, it's kind of been this journey. Like I've never woken up one day and be like, this is exactly it. I exactly know what I'm supposed to do. It's more like this beautiful journey of uncovering layer by layer the different facets and the, person God made me to be and the ways he wants to use my different, gifts and talents as I continue to do it all for his glory. So it's been such a fun journey for me, but that all resonates with me for sure as someone who, had kind of a hard childhood story as well.
Yeah. But you know what you said that I think like we could have a whole episode about right there is like, you said, I'm not sure if it's pride or what. And like, I think that's such an interesting question, because I think there can be both and components to that. But like, my knee-jerk reaction is that it doesn't strike me as pride at all. And I feel like that's something I see among women. I see among Christian women in particular, is this feeling that, I think if a man were to say that, like I've known since I was young that I was being called somewhere that I had a gift for leadership and I was going to use it. We would go, wow, what a great leadership story.
Right.
You are even more appointed and anointed to be in that spot. But for women, we feel really uncomfortable with that.
Right.
And I don't know, the solution to that. I don't know the answer to that. I do know that, like, I always say, like, if somebody's even worried about whether they will make it prideful, that tells me I don't need to worry about them, because they're going to be like the last people to do that. But it's so fascinating that I don't know what that thing is, but I've lived it. You've lived it. All the hard story people I know pretty much in my life have lived it, where it's like, I just sort of knew I was being asked to go somewhere that was going to change my family tree.
Right. Exactly.
And I don't think that has to be a pride thing. I really don't.
Right. And it wasn't like lifting my chin and nose at people around me, like I'm better than you. I'm going to amount to more than you. It was really not a sense of like looking down on others, but just feeling like more like there has to be more to life than sitting on the couch, getting drunk, watching TV, like living for yourself. Like they're better. Like I just had this innate feeling of like, there is more to life than this. And I don't know what it is, but I'm going to find it, because I didn't grow up in a Christian home. And luckily I found the Lord when I was about 14, and I feel like, it's been a trajectory and a learning since then. But it was just that feeling of like, there has to be more. And I feel like becoming a follower of Jesus helped discover like what that more really is and what it's all about. And then uncovering the gifts of the Spirit and all the gifts he's given us along the way. And, I love that. Okay. One of the things you say too that resonates is you say that fear is a boring liar. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah. So, let me just give the context here. A couple years ago, I, in addition to being an author and podcaster, I also coach women who want to be authors and podcasters and speak from the stage and write courses. And I had just had this like really long streak of coaching calls where I was seeing fear attack these women I love in very, very similar ways and in very, very similar timing in the process. And it was also attacking me in these very similar ways and similar, it's like, oh, you just made a really big step forward in getting serious about doing that dream. And existential crisis, like right on time. Like, oh, I have to go think about my whole life before I go on stage. Hold on. And so I just pulled out my phone one day and I was just like, no introduction, just like, it's all been done. It's all been done better. It's all been done by somebody the world actually wants to pay attention to. I can't start until it's perfect. I can't start until I am perfect. I can't start until I have the perfect blueprint and know every step in the staircase. What if I start and the critics come? What if they say, who does she think she is? What if it's too late? What if I don't matter? What if my voice doesn't matter? Right. And I just said, fear is not your friend. Start anyway. Start now. And posted it. And it was like people just super resonated with it of like, you were checking every box. And so when I was writing this book, I had kind of these two dots connect, somewhere in the recesses of my limbic brain. That it's sort of the high every writer's chasing, to kind of see two dots connect in a way you've never quite seen them connected before. And that is, what if fear attacks creatives in particular? I think fear attacks us all, but what if fear attacks creatives in particular, not meaning like, basket weavers or painters, but those of us who are creating good things to put in the world, because it is jealous that it itself is not creative at all. It is not tethered to muse or melody or the original force of all creation, short of being able to throw its voice to sound like us and to change its face just when we think we have it under control. It doesn't really have any gifts at all. And I kind of went on to say, fear is not a very creative guy, but he is a busy guy. And like any good, productive overachiever, he has learned how to prioritize. So if you're already hiding in plain sight or playing small and not moving forward on the work you were put here to do, fear's mostly going to leave you alone. A little fear maintenance mode, a little perfectionism or self-sabotage sprinkled in, and you are all set. Dare to show up and do work that matters, though, and you better expect fear to show up teeth bared and snarling. Like the mask falls off and you see the most vicious versions of what it actually is. It's not your friend. It's not just trying to keep you safe or look out for you. Its entire purpose is to keep you from fulfilling yours. because it knows that your work might help people. It might give people actual hope. It might change family trees. Yeah. And so we can actually use that. I jokingly said in a post lately, like, fear doesn't know it, but we've just used a classic rope-a-dope. We're going to draw him in just close enough to wear himself out before we hit him with our Rocky IV underdog soundtrack swelling knockout punch, which is we're going to use his weakness against him. If fear is that unoriginal, if fear is that boring, if fear is that predictable, we can actually use it to predict when we're on the right track. Because if you weren't doing work that matters, fear would not be bothered with you. He doesn't have the time. There are too many people he has to go discourage. And so, I just kind of basically say in the book, we can flip it for this script. Fear just showed up. Good. I must actually care about this work I'm about to do. I must actually worry about whether it's original, built with integrity, moves the conversation forward, makes good on the promised transformation, whether it helps to change lives. And as soon as we realize that, like, I just actually care, then it sort of just changes the whole filter. And now we can go, amazing. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And that's honestly how I use it now, Monica. Like, when I get really afraid, which is basically every day of my life right now, basically every day, I'm doing stuff way outside of my comfort zone. Yeah. Then I'm like, amazing. That's actually that's the path I should lean into, not run away from.
Right. And I think that's the important thing to realize, is that even people like yourself, or the people you see out there who you admire, they feel fear too, and they push through it. And I think you can never wait till all the fear leaves before you try to do anything, or you'll never do anything, because fear is always going to bubble up. No matter, you think you can outrun it. Like, if you're just successful enough, all the fear in your life will just vanish. And that's just such a lie. It's such not true.
Such a lie, because it's like bigger. As you get bigger in the things you're doing, the fear gets bigger. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And you have more to lose too. Right. And so there's more weight in it, I think. So yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing that. That is so good. Okay. I want to circle back to you. You talked a little bit about, sharing some of the science, and you say in the book that overthinking is exhausting. It's science. And now I am like, definitely a chronic overthinker. This is sort of my thing. I like to analyze things from every possible angle and kind of pick it apart. And in a way, it's like a gift of mine that I can like see different perspectives, and I can really look at things. But at the same time, I tend to overthink myself out of doing things, because if you think about something long enough, you'll talk yourself out of it. And so I would love to hear a little bit about the science, and just if you want to share more about just this for those of us who are chronic overthinkers.
Yeah. I mean, the talk yourself out of it is like more literal than we could ever guess. This surprised me when I started finding all of this research. Like, our brains are actually going to try to sabotage us right out of going after the dream. That's how they're built. So there's something called Bayesian brain theory, which is more commonly referred to as predictive brain theory, which essentially in its most simple form means that our brains are actually incredible prediction machines. I joke, like, take these things to Vegas. They're, better at making the odds than all the Vegas game makers, whatever. And so what they can do is they can look at something before we even start it and predict with great accuracy based on all of the past inputs of what has always worked before, what has always been true before, what we've always been able to do before. And say, nope, I don't think we're going to be able to do this actually. Like, it predicts with great accuracy whether we will be able to succeed or not. And then if it thinks we can't, it will actually like 90-degree divert us, hard left turn away from that hard, big, scary thing to something that is much more low cost, low effort, quick reward in the form of an instant gratification. Put it down on your list that's already done and mark it off, get that sort of instant dopamine hit. And the really cool thing about Bayesian brain theory is that it's constantly updating. So as you give it new data, as it takes in new sensory findings, it's constantly updating its models. And so in a really ironic way, the only way we can actually break our brains out of the habit of sort of hijacking us away from the work we really want to do. It's called an amygdala hijack. Like, let's go do something that feels better because this thing we're probably not going to be able to do anyway, is to start to give it new input by showing up and doing small but difficult things, small but things that scare us, and then increasingly larger and larger. And as we do that, as we're feeding it new input, it updates its models and goes, oh, we are people who can do hard things. We are people who can sit through the edginess of this feeling uncomfortable and not turn around and not turn tail every time the first second it gets hard. And so it will actually stop sabotaging you quite as much the more that you do it. And then just one more like interesting thing about why overthinking is so exhausting is that if you've ever had writer's block, where you're just really stuck in a problem and you just keep trying to like think your way through the problem, and it starts to feel like you could actually sneeze through your forehead. That's where all the existential angst in the world gets pent up right there behind your forehead. That there's a reason for that. You are overworking the prefrontal cortex, and it's actually getting a buildup of this byproduct that is naturally occurring but can become toxic in extreme levels called glutamate. And your brain will switch into the lower parts of your brain, the more like limbic parts of your brain, and go do something fun, and with what's called immediate mood repair. It immediately is trying to feel better, not because it just wants to go eat sugar and watch TV, but because if it doesn't shift out of that prefrontal cortex, then it can actually damage brain function. So it's actually a self-preservation thing that it's doing. And Ali Fallon said on my show when she was on, when you think limbic brain, think limbs. So you go stretch, you go on a walk, you dance in your living room, you shift out of the prefrontal cortex, you let it rest, you allow your mind to wander, you get bored, and then the answer sort of finds you. And so it's actually science that we are so tempted to go do something much more fun, much easier, rather than sitting there doing the hard thing we were called to do.
But it sounds like sometimes you do need to listen to that.
Yeah.
Like to protect your brain. Like,
yes.
It's interesting that you say that because I really resonated. You shared that post on social media this week talking about this concept. And I resonated with it because in the last 2 months, I've written over 60,000 words. I have been like grinding so hard with writing. And I got to this point where it's like my brain, like I have to shut off. And so I started doing all these home projects. So I was like I had, repainted my kitchen island. I'm giving my bathroom a makeover. We just added a window to our front door. I'm doing all these home projects, and partly because it's like spring and spring cleaning and fun. But also I was like, I have to shut my brain off and do something like a little bit more physical. That's just fun and enjoyable, and yet still gets like, that check off the list of something productive. And at first I kind of felt guilty after I saw your post, like, oh no, I'm like distracting myself. But now I'm actually thinking maybe my brain was literally just needing like a little reset, a little break. And then hopefully I can dive back into the writing feeling a little refreshed.
100%. I feel like it was, I don't know if it was Walt Whitman or Thoreau, probably both. And for sure, Mary, you can add to that list, like an afternoon walk is a critical part of my writing practice. Mm-hmm. That is when like all of the ideas are actually like incubating and percolating and happening. Mm-hmm. And then the writing, what we think of the writing is just more like transcription. Yeah. So like I've been filling out some like guest articles as part of launching this book, and I'll sort of read the question and I'm like, I have no idea what I would say to that. And I will get up from my chair and I'll go into the kitchen, have a little dance party, do some laps around my kitchen island, whatever, have a snack. And it's like, I can feel my brain writing the answer. And then I go sit down and it's just like court reporter taking it down. Yes. So it's, we confuse activity with doing the work, but the incubation, the percolation, if you think about how humans have babies, right? There's a lot of time sort of spent in that incubation stage for creation to happen, right? It's not just all about the sort of activity, right? It's sort of like we have to allow the space for those things to take form and take shape. And then we do this work of birthing it to the world.
That makes so much sense. That was my experience with writing my fiction novel that I just finished. It was almost like, I would go for a walk, or I would just, even at night, like couldn't sleep. It was more like I was seeing it almost like a movie playing out in my head. And then when I would sit down to write, I was just kind of writing down what I saw, but it was already there. That's so interesting. That's I love learning about the brain. It's so fascinating.
Yeah.
I love that. Oh, I would love to just close with this idea that you talk about of naming your inner critic. So you say that you gave your inner critic a name, Dear John, which made me laugh and squirm a little bit. So can you share what it looks like to befriend that inner critic, but not necessarily to believe it? How can we recognize when it's the inner critic that's kind of running the show and running our thought process?
Yeah. So you had said something earlier that reminded me of this part. Just sort of like this awareness of all the things that could go wrong, this awareness of all the kind of like attacks that could come. And so that section of the book actually kicks off talking about Ryan Reynolds was being interviewed by Hugh Jackman for their, Deadpool and Wolverine movie that was coming out at the time. And Hugh Jackman asked Ryan, like, hey, you've been really upfront about your anxiety, and that's helped a lot of people. And I'm just curious, how does that show up in your work? And Ryan essentially said, when I am in a movie, it's not just me as the actor saying the lines. I'm also in the audience as its harshest critic going, nope, I don't buy that. Oof, that wasn't any good. We're going to want to take another take of that. And he said that ecosystem of awareness allows him to create a better end result. And I just super, super resonate with that, because anything I do, I sit in the audience as its harshest critic. I went to college on a full debate scholarship, so I'm really good at anticipating the arguments before they even come, which can create really fleshed out, really solid, really well thought out ideas. And it can also be absolutely crushing, because you can work yourself into a place where it's like, no matter what I do, there's going to be criticism, which is not false. It's not false, right? There's actually relief there. There's freedom there. There's peace there. The second you can go, wait, no matter what I do, there's going to be criticism. Amazing. So let me just put it out there regardless. Right. Let me put out the best version of itself for sure, but let me not be stuck thinking I could actually get to a place where no one would ever find fault with me again. Like nothing on earth has ever been able to achieve that. So anyway, Dear John, as I say, I'm so familiar with my inner critic, I've named him Dear John. And I sort of paint this really fun picture that's kind of an amalgamation of some real life stories that I've had that I kind of footnote in the book. But it's like, Dear John wears khaki pants or jeans creased and crisp from the iron. His hair is all LA looks gelled off to the side. It's all hard and crunchy. My critic is all hard lines, no soft edges, all IQ, no EQ. And he personally thinks my unfettered access to the full range and depth of my emotions makes me seem hysterical and weak. But true to his name, Dear John tries to get me to break up with my dreams before they become a problem for anybody. And so Dear John is really important for me to introduce in that chapter, because when we first start confronting the inner critic, we will have to hold it accountable for just what a bully it has been. And there's going to be kind of a grief to that and an anger to that. And we're going to have conversations with that inner critic about it. Like, hey, I just want you to know how you've been treating me. But then we get to go a layer deeper. And this is when I introduce some work from Dr. Martha Sweezy, who does a lot of internal family systems work. And she actually walks us through a script that says, hey, maybe like when you talk to your inner critic, ask it how old it thinks you are. Because you might be surprised to find out that it thinks you're the 5 or 7 or 10-year-old version of you that you were when it was first born to protect you. And thinking about our inner critic as this protector who does it in a really messed up way, but it says, the world criticizes us when we do big things. Let's never do big things again. This is how we stay safe. Because our brain is going to try to keep us safe, not doing the work we were created to do. And so I was talking about this with Britt Frank, who's somebody else that I quote in the procrastination chapter. She was on my show recently, and she said, you know what else? We should ask our inner critic how old it is, because we may be surprised to find out that it's like a 2 or 3-year-old toddler who's just having a tantrum and it just needs a hug and a cookie. And now I think we can have a lot more compassion for that inner critic, right? In its mind, when it was born, this is what we had to do to stay safe. And we can say to it, hey, there is a grown-up in the room who can be trusted. That grown-up is me. I'm here now. I've got this. And we're going to do work that matters. And I promise you, criticism will not be fatal to us. The world's attack will not be fatal to us, because we know our hearts and we know our integrity and we know our intentions. And we just can't do this anymore, where we indefinitely delay the dream, all in the name of not getting hurt again. And when we talk to our inner critic like that with compassion and noticing, and I'm going to hear you, but you don't get the final say, then we find that inner critic relaxes a lot and goes, okay, cool. I just thought there was nobody else in charge, so I thought I had to step up. And it kind of makes me emotional, for like each of us, what was going on when that inner critic was born.
Wow. I definitely have struggled with having that really loud inner critic. Just that voice of condemnation. And, I think prayer has really helped me with that. Renewing my mind with the truth has really helped me with that. And also I think speaking it out loud, because if I try to ignore it or pretend like it's not there, it just almost gives it power. But if I say what it's saying to me out loud, it almost disarms it, because I hear how awful it is. And I think, I would never say that to a friend. I would never say that to someone I loved. No one who loves me, my husband, the people I love and respect the most in my life would never say these things to me or judge me so harshly. And so I just don't want to give it any power over me, because you just don't want to give it a voice when there's so many people in my life who who just I think, well, what would they say? What would a trusted friend say? What would my
Right.
best friend say to me in this moment? How would they show me compassion? And I don't know, that's just helped me so much.
I love that.
I like the idea of naming it. And I'm curious why your inner critic is a man, though. I'm curious why it's Dear John and not Dear Joan or something.
It's a really great question. I could probably be in therapy for about 20 years for, but he is an amalgamation of some real life characters that I've known. There's a part where I say, like, Dear John is furious. I walk into the room with any kind of opinions about the trajectory of my own career at all. That I have thoughts about how things should go. There's this one part that I reference, and I do footnote it, where he takes minute by minute timestamp notes for when I'm speaking for what I can do better, and then folds it up in this serial killer origami and hands it to me. And I actually, at a conference in Minneapolis, had a man do that. And so there is an element of, I think that every woman listening has known what it's like to sit in a room and be spoken over. Let's just be real. Like, women do that to women a lot, but it's men do that to women a lot more, maybe. I don't know. The more is a question mark, but we'll say two. Yeah. Yeah. But it's interesting. It could very easily be a woman since, it's in my head, but no, Dear John.
Yeah. For me, it's always myself. I feel like I'm my own worst critic, and that's just been true in my story. So for me, it's like, I just imagine this like me, but like if I was like perfect and flawless and a size 2 and just, this best version of myself. And she's just standing there, arms crossed, staring at me, like telling me all the ways that I don't measure up. And I'm like, that's kind of.
So I call that version the illusionist in the distance. That's a separate character in my head. This is this me, 1,000 different me's and 1,000 different mountaintop moments who look at me for a second, smile a superior smile, and then leave me, go on without me. So that kind of comes into the chapter 10, perfectionism is hiding with better PR. So I have a whole cast. We all actually do. I've learned that through this book. We have a whole cast of characters in our head. And Dear John's just one of them. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's so good. It's so relatable and so real. And I think it's good to have these conversations and just talk about it and hear the struggles of other people, so people know that they're not alone. Because sometimes if you're just alone, you don't hear conversations like this or read books like yours, and you just start to think that you're a little bit crazy, or you just get this idea that other people don't struggle with this as much as I do. And sometimes I think reading books like yours are so powerful because it helps you to learn, actual practical strategies, but also just know that you're not alone in these struggles and that there is hope and there is a way forward. And that is just such a beautiful testimony and encouragement for all of us.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so excited for people to get this book in their hands. I worked for 12 hours a day, 12 months a year, 12 hours a day for the last 12 months to get it down on the page. And I'm just like, as we record this, we're like 10 days from it being out, and I'm just so ready. So ready.
Yes. So good. Well, I have only read bits and pieces of it. I get my hard copy soon, and I'm so excited to finish reading it. You are such a beautiful writer, such an encouragement to me personally and to all of us. So thank you so much, Mary. I would love if you would just close our time in prayer for that woman listening who maybe just feels a little stuck, a little unseen, a little bit alone in these things that she's kind of wrestling and wandering through. So if you could just pray for that woman. Yeah.
God, I just want to take a second to really hold the hearts of the woman who's been listening to this whole episode and nodding her head. And she knows that there is good work that you have prepared for her, that there is a purpose for her life, that you are asking her to step out in faith for more, and that she has just been letting fear get the louder, bigger last word for far too long, that she has been choosing safety and protection and sort of hiding in plain sight in the name of being servant-hearted and not being prideful and making it about herself, shoving other people into the spotlight, being so good at shining a spotlight on others. Meanwhile, not a single day can go by without this thing that you've called her to, that she can't stop thinking about it. She knows that she is being called up and asked to do more, and more can feel like such an uncomfortable word, God, in this world, especially, when we hear messages like, we have to be humble and we can't make it about us. And we know that when we are truly stepping out and doing the work we were called to do, it was always about who might it help. It was always about an act of radical obedience, of not being able to see the entire staircase. You do not always give us the whole blueprint, Lord. In fact, you rarely do, because then we wouldn't need to be close with you every step of the way. We think about those times when you give us the talent and you ask us to go do something with us, and you don't tell us to do something with that talent. You don't tell us exactly how you want us to do it, but you just trust us to steward that gift well. And then you come back to see what we've done with it. And Lord, I just think about that woman who is listening right now, that woman who's going to have this book in her hands. And she knows that when you ask her what she did with what she was given, that she can say to you, one of my favorite Irma Bombeck quotes, which is, when I get to heaven, I can say, I have not a single bit of talent left. I used everything you gave me. God, that woman, when she shows up, when she does the work you have for her, I know it's going to send shockwaves around the world, these ripple effects that go on and change family trees we can't even begin to understand right now. But another year goes by and the clock goes on ticking and the world is worse for her absence. Give her the courage to show up imperfectly, without it all figured out, to just show up and say yes and know that every step will be made clear in the right time. I pray for her, and I pray for the people who are waiting on her. In your name, amen.
Amen. So beautiful. Thank you so much, Mary. Okay, where can everybody stay connected to you and pick up a copy of your new book?
Yeah, I'm going to point people to two things real quick. One is in my second book, Slow Growth, we actually introduced, I say we, that's me, myself, and I. These 5 achiever types that we introduced in that book, they actually carry over into Underestimated. We talk about how each achiever type can get stuck playing small and where they move forward from there. And so we have the performer, always on their toes, needs to show themselves, but for sure also other people how far they've come. I am the classic performer. We have the tightrope walker who could care less who's clapping. They just need higher and higher death-defying feats to feel the same amount of good. Our masquerader does a little sleight of hand while they shove somebody else in the spotlight so they can hide in the dark corners, hide in plain sight. Our contortionist is the classic people pleaser. We contort because it is easier than to be criticized. And that illusionist in the distance is, they think that they themselves and all the conditions to begin must be perfect before they can even start. And so if you go to achieverquiz.com or marymarantz.com/quiz, my last name is Marantz. We have a quiz that takes like 2 minutes, 10 minutes if you overthink it. The questions are fun. The results are deep in true Mary form. And I'm going to tell you based on your type, how you're playing small and how you move forward from here. Name the fear, move forward from here. So that's achieverquiz.com. And then if they go to namethefear.com, depending on when this airs, either if we're in pre-order or that first launch week, we actually have the whole, regardless of when they come over, we have the whole first chapter up there that they can read for free. Download it and start reading today. Get a feel for my writing style, which is very metaphorical and lyrical and really just there's a lot of pop culture references, but it's also super deep and super smart, IQ and EQ. And while you're there, if you go ahead and pre-order or order during launch week, we have the whole audiobook, which I read as a gift for going ahead and getting the book. So that's huge. You get kind of 2 books for the price of one. You can mark one up and you can listen to me read it to you for the other way. So that's at namethefear.com. And then I'm at Mary Marantz on Instagram. Come tell me what your achiever type is, or if you listened to the episode.
Yes, I love it. I'll be sure to link all of that in our show notes. Thank you so much, Mary. You are such a blessing. God bless you and this book and just everything that you are doing.
Thank you. I love you so much.
Yay. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of the Inner Revival podcast. I really hope this has blessed you, has encouraged you, and has given you some good food for thought. If you enjoyed this, please make sure to rate and review and subscribe for more. Maybe send it to a friend or share it on your social media. I would be so grateful for your help in spreading the word about the podcast. And make sure to check out Mary Marantz, follow her on social media, check out her new book, and I will link everything in the show notes. God bless you guys, and we will see you next week.